As a part of culture cinema, we are undertaking these interesting panel discussions. One of them we had morning on animation. Today is a panel of noted academicians in filmmaking, especially. This will be moderated by Professor Ujjwal Chowdhury. The topic of discussion is culture and contemporary cinema. Professor Ujjwal Chowdhury is Pro Vice Chancellor of ADAMAS University, Kolkata. Dr. Gauri Chakraborty is a panelist. She is a practicing filmmaker, academician, and head of Amity School of Communications in Noida. Mrs. Padma Ramesh is a teacher, trainer, journalist, and eager film enthusiast. She heads Annapurna Film School in Hyderabad. Dr. Piyush Roy is an award-winning critic, columnist, author, curator, filmmaker, and professor in film journalism. He brings over 2 decades of work experience, and he is from RV University, Bangalore. He heads the School of, the founder dean of School of Liberal Arts. Dr. Ambrish Saxena is the professor and dean of DME Media School and director of DME Studios and Production. He's from Noida. And Dr. Vikrant Kishore is a filmmaker and academic in Deakin University, Australia, Melbourne. So we have a wonderful panel, and I now hand over the talk to Dr. Professor Ujjwal Chowdhury. Please take it ahead.
Thank you. I really appreciate Mr. Praveen Nagda for organizing this program, which is path-breaking in a way. It focuses on cinema and culture. And with the support of UNESCO and several other organizations, a fabulous program has been conceived. And I'm thankful that he has given me not the task of being a panelist, but for being a moderator. Because it's the moderator who knows the least, but has the highest power in a panel discussion. Because he or she introduces the speakers, and I mean, that has already been done. And also, is the timekeeper. So he said the last word without saying anything substantive. So I would not like to get into much of concept, because these will be told by our friends who are the real scholars, experts. So today's focus is on culture and cinema, as we know. And obviously, when we look at culture, there can be different interpretations of culture, but we are largely looking at popular culture that's reflected through cinema, and also at times some niche cultural aspects as well, or niche tendencies that we can see in cinema. So film analysis is actually all about, when we do a film analysis, we don't only look at techniques, technologies, and the science of filmmaking. We also look at the art of filmmaking and the sociology or culture of the film. So what exactly does the film speak about a society, or what aspects of society does it reflect? Now the question is whether cinema influences culture or culture influences cinema. And that's a chicken and egg question. Because yes, popular culture has a lot of things to be taken from cinema. Remember the bell-bottom trousers that we had, popularized by the likes of Amitabh Bachchan, and many, many other things in Hindi popular culture. So popular culture takes a lot of, not only an attire, but also style of talking and the hairstyle and the style of moving, or even certain times, certain values and all. Like many things are connected or taken from cinema. Similarly, society or culture also influences cinema. So the type of things that we'll see in Iranian cinema and Bollywood would be very drastically different. So whether it's fashion, whether it's political culture, by the way, there is this, you remember this Upkar cinema, immediately after the freedom movement of India. So there was this whole concept of nationalism, a very nascent nationalism that was coming up in independent India. Upkar, Mera Bharat Mahan slogan. Those things had really done that charm, that impact. And then you have the entire belief system of popular belief system on Kashmir in recent times. Haider was a very impactful cinema in that. Then Uri of another type, the surgical strike, the so-called surgical strike. The whole concept of angry young man of the 70s had got reflected through the character of Amitabh Bachchan, as we know, in Diwar, and the new age youth that's coming up and all that. The rural to urban migration got reflected in cinema in a very big manner. And you have the huge new wave movement coming from these from this understanding of the newer realities of the time, whether it's Bhuvan Shom or Manthan or Nishant or Ankur, you know, Pather, Pachali, Jukti Tokko Goppo, everything has a reality, cultural and societal reality that have been taken in the cinema in a big way. And this whole concept of culture cinema dichotomy, culture cinema mutual impact, we find also in a big way in the global new wave movement, particularly filmmakers like Toflo or Godard, the French filmmakers. They are the French new wave in a way, 1940s and 50s. That brought in a big way reflecting society and reality of France. So that brought the question of society and culture influencing cinema in a big way. We had so many films of that type at that point. Julian Rain, Breathless, 400 Blues. I'm sure you are aware of these films, those particularly those who are associated with cinema. So deeply influenced Indian New Wave cinema also from the French New Wave. And similarly, we find when you had the cowboy era of Hollywood, you had the impact on Sholay as well. But then Sholay took the aspects of the Indian society, Indian culture. At that time, Chambal Ghati was a very big aspect of popular thinking and talk. So that got reflected there in Sholay. So contemporary Indian cinema and culture also is getting reflected. For example, Understand When a Lady Says No has reflection through Pink, and the Pink also has strengthened the women's decision making on their rights over their body, over their mind. So that's very beautiful way of doing that. Today we have several aspects that reflects cinematic influence on popular culture, whether it's gadgets, whether it's aspirations, dress, jewelry, vehicles, lifestyle, music, dance, understanding of even the concept of marriage has evolved. Marriage has evolved in a certain manner, and Sangeet, which was not known in Bengali marriages, is now a part of Bengali marriages. And there is a huge Bollywood impact because Sangeet has been so much reflected in the Bollywood in such a manner, and so much of music is there. A whole lifestyle has been created around it. So we have already entered into an audiovisual era. Post-liberalization, we have already entered into an audiovisual era where consumerism rules the roost. And therefore, in such a situation, the impact of consumerism as a culture is also there in cinema. We find that. These are some of my very brief opening comments. Let's move on to the real experts. I'm surely a media educator and a media learner, but then I'm more into the broad media spectrum. But we have with us people who are experts in film culture, film education. So let's listen from them in brief one round, and then we can get into questions and all. So first, I request, if you don't mind, let's begin with a lady. Professor Dr. Gauri Chakraborty, the head of the department of, the head of the Institute of ASCO, Amity School of Communication, Noida, and who has her research, PhD, and postdoctoral writing, everything in the field of cinema. So over to you, Dr. Gauri Chakraborty, to discuss how culture and cinema have influenced one another. Over to you, Dr. Chakraborty. Is she there?
Yes.
Gauri, you are.
Sir, I was on mute. Sorry.
Yes.
Sir, thank you so much for this opportunity. And because I see seniors in the house and in the true Indic philosophy, I will give my salutes to Professor Saxena, to Professor Ujjwal, and to all the peers. And I'm doing this in this meeting particularly today because we are looking at the concept of culture and cinema. Usually I wouldn't begin like that. I would also like to tell the house that I stand at the crossroads of two distinct things, just like Dr. Vikrant Kishore does. We, at one point, I represent the vast sea of, of, let's say, classical dance, because I continue to be a performer. And on the other side, I also lens at cinema as a professional. So this puts you in a stance where you're constantly navigating meaning, you are introspecting, And the extrapolations sometimes are remarkable. You sit one morning with a cup of tea, and there you say, "Oh my God, what a beautiful thought has come to my mind today morning." I would like to say that whenever we discuss cinema, it's been a trend because I've dealt with young, academicians, scholars, students who have a different perception of popular cinema, popular culture. But as you walk into the spaces which celebrate cinema, one of the first, baptism, as I may say, is to talk to them about cinema being the seventh art. The duality that the medium has, that on one side it is completely apparatus, and on the other side what's embedded within it are the beliefs, the set of beliefs, which is also the so-called definition of culture in dictionaries. And culture has always embarked on the representation of identity, the politics of representation. Like Professor Ujjwal Chowdhury was saying, it deals with the politics of the time, the masters of the contemporary time, their ideology. It kind of it has a repository of ideology within its representation. And so whenever we have somebody who walks in, maybe a usual question will be, where are you from? This is a very interesting question that even Piyush must be using this in his classes. When we deal with youngsters and we say, where are you from? So some of my students will say, I'm from Delhi. And then I'll ask them again, you're not getting my question. Where are you from? And as this moves on, जैसे कहते हैं हिंदी में परत दर परत, layer through layer, the person then understands where you're getting to. So even in the state of Delhi, some of us have rajma chawal on Sundays. Other people have chingdi malai curry, and that itself shows that they may be in Delhi, physically, but they come from certain roots. And when they consume cinema, their understanding of it is so it's such an interrelationship. In fact, I was attending a webinar on the great Maestro Satyajit Ray, and Sharmila ji was mentioning how he always believed in making cinema for the Bengali intelligentsia. I mean, that was his belief, because he felt that there were certain nuances in his work which can only move across, through people who understand that language. And I've also experienced it. When I didn't know Bengali at film school, at the Film Institute, my interpretation of the films was slightly different. As I knew the language in and out, when I see it now, I completely, as I'm part of that culture, I completely, revel in the little nuances that are embedded. It's like you're really looking for the pearls of wisdom strewn across. The other point that I want to begin, and I just want to close after these few sentences, is, we talk about culture, cinema being the seventh art, traditional arts, folk arts, influencing the way. Rikoto Konodo, he referred to cinema as in 1911 as the seventh art. But what I also think is that sometimes, in technology, we use the word backward integration very easily. कि नया phone, sorry, I may use a little Hindi if I'm allowed. If the new phone comes in, then somebody will say, oh, I want to, kind of upgrade to the next level. So it's a 7 series, 8 series. But I'd rather say, let's look at the backward integration of culture with the recent art form, 100 years old, cinema. And when cinema interprets art that we have, the culture that really embodies identities, look at those magnificent works of art. Look at the work of Carlos Saura. I mean, that's another level. Look at Arun Khopkar's work, Shabnam Sachdev's, The Peacock Plume, where she, as a filmmaker, is, interpreting the life and work and, the health of a performer. So I think even that, even the integration of culture, lensing at culture, of cinema lensing it culture is such an undiscovered domain. And I must finish by complimenting Praveenji, because for me, this whole name culture cinema is like a treat. Lots of compliments. I mean, it's amazing how he has curated it. So compliments to him. And so that those are my few words for the beginning. Sir.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gauri. We'll come back to you with second round in questions and observations maybe a little later. You're right that politics of resistance or politics of the moment got reflected in several cinemas around the world. Whether it's Ben-Hur at a particular point of time, or Battleship Potemkin in the Russian Revolution context, or Haider in contemporary Indian context, or Chok or Ardha Satya in the context of Indian politics or Indian society a few decades earlier, this reflection of socio-political reality of the moment and politics of resistance have been there. And on the other hand, the dominant dominant cinematic culture sometimes also reflected the decadence in the popular culture of the society as well. Great Grand Masti and Grand Masti, this sort of that series of films clearly reflects that as well. So we move on to the next speaker now. We have with us Professor Padma Ramesh, Dean of Annapurna School of Film and Television, a very very creative school of education from Hyderabad. I had the pleasure of being there, founded by Nagarjuna and his creative wife Amula. And Padmaji is leading the education there. So over to Professor Padma Ramesh for her opening comments. Unmute yourself.
Yes, I have. So thank you, Professor Ujjwal, and it is great to be on part of this wonderful panel actually. And so let me start by saying that I do believe that the relationship between cinema and culture is complicated, is at the same time being dynamic, because movies or cinema certainly influence mass culture, as we all know. And a culture which consumes them, which has consumed them right from the beginning, right from the time the Wright brothers started their first film. At the same time, the culture which consumes them are also part of the cinematic movement. So cinema is a reflection of prevailing concerns, attitudes, beliefs, which Professor Ujjwal said and which Gauri was also talking about. For me, coming from a purely academic background and trying to make sense of how popular cinema and culture are integrated. It has taken me some time. I still keep reading it, like Gauri was saying, and I still keep thinking at what points, at what intersectionality do these two pillars of society, as it were, culture on one side and cinema on one side, both very, very complicated, both very, very dynamic, come together as a synergy. It is, often while we are talking of, let me just go back a little when, Mr. Nagda wrote to me and said, can we do something on cinema and culture in contemporary cinema? For a minute, I thought, oh my God, this is such a vast subject. Where do you start? The minute you say culture, it's huge. Now, what part of culture are you talking about? Are you talking about culture which is of literature, of arts, of painting, of music? Or are you talking of a more popular culture, which is what a lot of us understand today? Because the kind of culture which is coming to the fore now, which youngsters, because I, being part of a college where we get a number of young students, they understand as culture is what they are seeing in films of today, as in films of contemporary India or films of contemporary global films. So while films and cinema has often, talked about certain ideologies which were prevalent at that time, as we go forward, I would also want to say that, sorry, I have a bad connection here. I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can
Okay,
hear you.
I'm sorry. So it is very important to remember that this culture, as what we are talking about, is also constantly changing from period to period, time to time. Within 5 years, the concept of popular cinema has changed. This I have seen it in my own lifetime, because what we thought of as culture 5 years ago or 10 years ago has totally changed as what my students see it. So if what you were talking about, Professor, that in 60s you had Lal Bahadur Shastri, who said, Jai Jawan and Jai Kisan, and they made a film called Upkar, which talked about the political culture of the time. It was about politics. It was about a society coming to grips with war. And today you have a film like Uri. And what does Uri do? Uri does not talk of a culture which the youngsters are aware of. Uri talks of a very toxic political, uh, you know, persona of the hero, of the protagonist. So our understanding of popular culture, what cinema has been trying to portray over the years, has changed. At one point we had at one point we had people like Bimal Roy or Guru Dutt, or even no, or even B Shantaram, making and talking of films in which social and political ideology was embedded. Today the contemporary cinema talks of ideas, and or talks of ideas which are not really ideas. There's no, I personally believe that the cinema of today has lost the ideology at some point. Most of
Okay.
it is coming from, it is lent or it is borrowed from sources, other sources. I think that's one point we would like to look at.
Great. That's a point of debate and discussion, very well placed, that there is a loss of ideology to an extent, and there is originality under question in many a cinema, in contemporary cinema in today's time. Moving on, we also know that with the coming in of new technologies, there is a radical change that's happening in the cinema world. So coming in of digital filmmaking has created a market for short films, has created a market for alternate cinema, and has created a market through the digital medium as well, through the internet medium. So how this modern technology based and modern approach based cinema or short films reflecting culture of the moment? Is it a bigger democratization of the medium? Is it a better reflection, if not of the overview culture, but of niche cultures of different segments of the society? Maybe we can invite a global scholar to speak on that. We have Professor Vikrant Kishore with us from Deakin University, Australia, a scholar of international repute. He is heading the film and television education there. He has been partnering with several institutes in India, particularly DME Academy of Delhi, to create world-class media conferences and deliberations and media film festivals. So over to you, Professor Vikrant Kishore from Australia.
Thanks, Professor Ujjwal. That's a very good start. Lots of things being discussed at the moment, and it confuses me. Unfortunately, it confuses me, because the moment we talk about culture and cinema, and as Padma also mentioned, that it's a huge topic. And if we start discussing culture and cinema, we are going to be of a big disservice. That what are we doing? Because we'll be talking at every corner, but not talking about anything. So I will focus more about the work and about technology and things and how things change. And I'm going to use my book, which was also my PhD. And the title is From Real to Real, Folk Dances of India in Bollywood Cinema. So published by UNESCO, and this particular panel is also being supported by UNESCO. So I think it's a good kind of melding of two things here. So what I see, and what in my research also what I found, that culture always lends itself what cinema does. Cinema is basically it's telling stories in different approach. Of course, cinema isn't the place, or shouldn't be the place where it should be the place which will be telling people how to be cultured or what culture is all about. Okay, cinema comes out from individual storytelling and how they want to do. But in that way also, they also bring in their own traditions, culture, and their interpretation of culture in different ways. And then, because now if I start talking about political culture, it's a huge field. If I start talking about even folk culture, it's a huge field. So where do we start talking and where do we go as a panel? And that's what I think we need to start thinking, that are we talking about Indian cinema? Are we talking about Western cinema? Are we talking about, Eastern cinema, cinema of China, Korea? It's a huge field. So I feel if I start making comment, just on one thing, on all of these things, it will be, I feel at loss. But I will just talk about my interest in Indian cinema and specifically Hindi cinema. And what I see with Hindi cinema right from the beginning, if you see from Raja Harish Chandra, or to the work that Bombay Talkies did under Devika Rani and Himanshu Rai, it was always about, initially, Indian cinema was big in terms of mythological stories. Mythological stories, if you look at, it was only very big in India, not in other parts of the world, because this was a very kind of a Ramayana, Mahabharata, or Purana and things people were associated with. Also, it was a part of traditional folk theaters. So folk theaters immediately lent itself to all these kind of storytelling in cinema. And later on, it all developed. But what I also talk about, that how folk or traditional storytelling gave way to, popular storytelling. But then the popular, the way it mixed and the way it, in a way, created or infused with various other cultures, that in a way it bastardized it. Okay. And then when I see folk dance forms today, I always see folk dance forms like, I'll give you example which I use, Chao or Bhangra. Now you see Chao, Shiva coming and doing break dance, or Durga doing a kind of a, disco. Or if you look at Bhangra, disco Bhangra has been very popular, and now pop, rap, all kinds of Bhangras that you see. Now these are the kind of cultural changes also being brought by cinema. So how do we protect it? And one of the things which UNESCO does is about creating, some kind of semblance or some kind of, focus on keeping our traditions. Of course, keeping one thing in mind, that change is constant. So even culture will change, new things will come. But how do we, cling on or protect some of the ethos and values of culture? So I'll leave it here. I won't take much time, but there are lots of interesting things here to talk about.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Contributed to the debate by expanding the scope from beyond India to a global scale, one, and also on how cinema can help ethos, protect ethos and culture of certain societies at different times. In the next round, you could give more examples, particularly in contemporary times, and through the use of multiple forms of cinema, not just that feature film format of 2 hours plus, 100 minutes plus, not just that, in various formats of cinema, how culture is being reflected, overhauled and changed. Maybe in the next round. We now go to your partner in crimes, in many a crime, Dr. Ambrish Saxena. So we bring him. Dr. Ambrish Saxena is a great friend of mine and Dr. Vikrant as well. And he is the current dean of DME Media School, a fabulous concept of practical driven media education he is putting forth in the national capital NCR region of India. So over to you, Dr. Ambrish Saxena.
Thank you, Professor Ujjwal Chowdhury. Now, culture is something which I have also been pondering on, but I have not been able to actually make out what is meant by culture, because there are hundreds of definitions of culture. And if I can refer to two recent things, like yesterday I was reading an article in Mumbai Mirror. which says that temples were not part of Indian culture, or rather the Hindu culture or Hindu religion, whatever you call it, because normally we always confuse between religion and culture. But then temples used to be not their part of Indian culture or Hindu culture till 1500 years ago. Now, if you say this to anybody, nobody will believe in the first place. And but this article I found is completely a well-researched article. But then there is a debate, or could be a debate on this, whether temples could be part of Indian culture or not. Another thing which I can refer to, yesterday in the inaugural function of Culture Cinema, one documentary was shown by Praveenji that was on Indonesian culture. Now, I found a lot of resemblance, and we all understand the resemblance which is there between Indian culture and the Indonesian culture. So the all folk dances were so close to Indian folk dances, and then it was all this presentation of Ramayana. So we all are in a habit of watching Ram Leela in India, and the remarkable thing that I particularly noted, the commentator and all, they were not referring to a religion. They were not, because we always attach Ramayana or Ram Leela with Hinduism, but that was not the thing. They were attaching it to their social fabric, to their heritage, and to their culture, not using the word religion. So these are the things. So from India to Indonesia, I mean, even in the global perspective, we find that there is always a number of interpretations. But then, when we try to relate culture to cinema, and particularly contemporary cinema, so within the country, there can be a lot of interpretations of culture, as in the beginning, Professor Gauri referred to that. There could be I mean, in North Indian culture or the South Indian culture or the urban culture or the metropolitan culture and all. So what exactly is reflected in cinema? Cinema is ultimately a reflection of the society. But then when it is showing some story, obviously there are representation of the language, of the lifestyle, of the nuances of the society, the complexities of that particular society. All that is reflected in cinema. And if we talk about the present day cinema, and I will refer particularly the cinema of 2019, 2020, and 2021, very recent things I would refer to. Like if we talk about the socio-economic conditions, because I believe any cinema is affected by the socio-economic conditions of a particular time. And this is not uh, focused to India only. This is all around the world. And if we look at the economic conditions of the country, then we find the cinema of today is resembling to the cinema of 1980s, wherein there used to be so much instability, the political unrest, the economic problems, the uncertainty of future before the youth. So a lot of such films were being made wherein there used to be too much violence, too much insensitivity, which was prevailing in the society. And if I refer to the films which are being made today, I can refer to Radhe, which is a 2021 film, which is full with violence and all. I can even refer to Mumbai Saga. And if I pick up examples from web series, then I can refer to Mirzapur and the Patal Lok. So violence is one part which is happening in contemporary cinema in a big way. And then I would like to refer to hyper nationalism. I mean, there, even if I mean, people don't like the use of this term, we can put it only as nationalism. But the kind of films which are being made, as Professor Chowdhury initially referred to, the films like Upkar, so even Shahid, that kind of films were being made even in 60s and 70s. But the kind of films which are being made now in 21st century, and particularly during the last 5 to 10 years, they are portraying nationalism completely in a different way. Like if I can refer to the Sher Shah, which is a film of this year only, which is on the life and the work of Vikram Batra, who sacrificed his life in Kargil. Then if I can refer to the film Bhuj, which is in the backdrop of the 1971 war, when the Pakistani forces bombarded the Bhuj airport, and the whole event, the whole sequences which happened afterwards. Also, if I can refer to film like Suryavanshi, which is again in the same backdrop, and one film which has already been released on Z5, which is State of Siege, which is in the backdrop of the attack which was made on this Ahmedabad Akshardham temple. So, and then if further proceeding, if we find the parallels in culture, like referring to OTT, on OTT we are finding all kind of content, and in a way we are moving from as a largest producer of films to the largest consumer of films. So on OTT, all kind of contents are available, and not only the Hollywood. I mean, earlier, besides the Hindi cinema or Hindi Indian cinema in any other language, we were very fond of watching the Hollywood films. But now there are Spanish films, a Spanish web series, and if I can refer to Money Heist, which is one of the topmost shows on Netflix since its release. Even I can refer to Fauda, which is an Israeli espionage series. And then obviously Radhe, I have already referred to, but then here I am referring to in a context wherein the impact of the foreign culture or foreign films is seen on Indian culture and Indian films, because Radhe in a way it is said to be a remake of the Korean action thriller The Outlaw. Another film and this is a film by of Salman Khan. And if I can refer to another film of Salman Khan, which is Bharat, which was released in 2019, this was picked up from a South Korean film, which was Ode to My Father, which was made in 2014. And then Bharat, in Bharat, like in Ode to My Father, what was happening? The perspective of a common person after this South Korea emerged after the Second World War. So it was reflecting from 1950s to 2010. Similarly, in Bharat, that attempt was made, wherein the common man's perspective of post-independent India, which he witnessed from the age of 8 to the age of 70. So these are the things which I feel are important to look at while we are focusing on this discussion of trying to have this relationship between culture and contemporary cinema.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. You expanded further, bringing in the post-independence India till now, how the various cultural modes or the dominant thoughts in the society have influenced cinema. While you were speaking, I was thinking of names of films in popular Hindi cinema, which reflected the culture or moment, every time. Like the early nation building or integrity and the war situation with China and all that. In that context, Uppkar. Partition of India and the pains connected to that, Garam Hawa. The angry young man of the 1970s wanting a place under the sun, Diwar. The search of the minorities for a Hindustani character of an equal citizenship and all that, or a place in the society without discrimination, Qom. The angst of the youngsters of Kashmir, Haider. The strong expanse of, what sort of the expression of aggressive nationalism in a particular context, the political context, Uri. The old romantic idea, the early romantic idea in cinema, Bobby. The new age cinema in Hindi cinema and overall in Indian cinema, Bhuvan Shom. Then the popular Daku culture through Sholay and Chambal Ghati and all that. And the current free for all sort of a different, the culture of live together and freedom of sexuality and all through Love Ajkal. the search of a hero who will set everything correct overnight, Nayak. The angst of the woman start deciding on what is good or bad, and her freedom to say yes or no, pink or thappad. Thappad also the issues connected to women inside the family, inside the marriage, within the marriage, you know, and changing roles of men and women in society or in a family, Ka and Ki. A very large scale overview, sort of like Ben Hur was in Western cinema, Mughal Azam in India. So various cinema have reflected various moments in the cultural, whether it's societal, whether it's aesthetic cultural, whether it's related to relationship, whether it's political. Different moments of Indian society reflected through different cinema. What I would, before I call the next speaker, what I would like to ask the four speakers so far for the second round. Today, for the last 17, 16 months, we are going through an unprecedented situation of restricted movement, lockdown, full or partial. So this pandemic impact of cinema, what it will be? Are we looking forward to new cultural norms or modes within the family, within the society, at the political level, at the cultural level, at whatever are those new things? Even technologically different formats of films have come. So pandemic and cinema, kindly focus in the next round, which will be a shorter round, each one speaking for only 2 minutes. I will request everyone in the audience to ask any question in the chat box. We will pick up specifically if it is for someone specific, then I will also add that. So I'll request everyone to ask questions in the chat box. Now we go to the last panelist, but the best part is he's the youngest person in the panel. I am always youngest of all. I'm always permanently 22 years old with 33 years of experience. But here we truly have a young man and a man who's accomplished a lot within his young age. A doyen sort of person in understanding of film studies and writing on cinema. He is the young dean of a newly born university in India, in South India, called RV University, Dean of Liberal Arts and Film Studies. I'm talking of Dr. Piyush Roy. Dr. Piyush Roy, over to you.
Thank you, Ujjwal sir, and it's often easy to come in the end because a lot of things have been covered. So what I'll rather do is, because we have traversed the whole journey of culture, starting from the influences that have shaped our cinema. And there was one very interesting paper which I had read some time back about how the 5-year plans have kind of influenced the themes of cinema, post-independent cinema. So, the initial thing about agriculture, labor sector and all that, and you had films like Mother India and all. Then the mechanization era came in and you had movies like Naya Daur, you had songs like Chodo Kal Ki Baat Purani and all those things. So, but I'll narrow down to this from 3 perspectives. One would be I will also coming into this from my own journey of writing about cinema, about stars, actors, the filmmaking process as a journalist and then editor of Stardust, to eventually now making my own cinema. So now as a filmmaker, when I crossed over to the other side and as an academic writing from about cinema to on cinema, lot of perspectives have come in. And here I would like to look at what is culture? Culture and how does culture influence? Culture is context. As we have all very rightly said, be it how Iranian culture, I mean, as they say globally, there are about 7 plots or 10 plots if you want to go by the Natya Shastra or whatever. Certain number of plots are there. Human stories are universal. It is the culture that gives the context, and the context is what gives the narrative its own manifestation. And as the UKC sir said, he's always 22. I was just before this session watching a movie called Liberal Arts, where a professor on the verge of retirement, he says that I have always been 19 because I teach undergrads and they are 19 to 22. So I can't and when I look at the mirror, yes, my face looks different, but at heart I am still, because so I would like to say if we take the context of the culture, then there is a culture of thinking, culture of making, and culture of consuming films. These have drastically changed. And so, like short film, the whole idea of this idea of short film or even documentary being in vogue now was unthinkable 10 years ago. Like when I made my first documentary, I was always told that this is a genre that never has a market and all. But I was very clear what its audience was. So I looked at university spaces and the film which pointedly asks pleasures, prejudice, pride, is there an Indian way of filmmaking? And I took it to a tour across universities in the UK, and every department engaged, from South Asian studies to culture and communication to pure film studies. So, and then the culture of making films. In the pandemic, I was able to finish my next experimental film. And here I had shot the stuff before the pandemic, but my editor was in Nasik, I was in Bhubaneswar, and my narrators were in UK, and we made the film. So that's something that is the culture of making films, that everybody has to be together on the set. The director has to monitor everything. The whole thing is changing now. You can hire talents from all over the world, and that's the positive side of it. And when you bring in people from different cultural contexts, what they bring into the edit, what they bring into the sound of a film, inherently helps it become global by default. And then of course the culture of consuming, the OTT. I remember when I had first interview, I was a cub reporter at that time, and I had gone to interview the great Hema Malini, and I was ushered into her living room, and there were only only golden jubilees, platinum jubilees. None of her film. I mean, she was the most successful actress of the 70s, and that is something unthinkable now. A film running 7 days is a big thing. Forget about golden jubilees and all these. And then she said something very pointedly, like we were the last of the stars of our era, because what happened is, how did we consume cinema then? You had to go to the theater, you had to queue up, you had to pay things in black. Sometimes you used to save your entire week's pocket money to buy a ticket. And then when we went into the theater, we looked at it, we looked up. So we looked up on the screen, so they were by default larger than life. Today we see our stars at every place. From they first came down to television, and now they have come to Insta. So they have reduced themselves. So and the moment we look, the way we look at television, the way we look at a laptop, it is our eye level. Notionally, psychologically, the star has shrunk. And so there never will be another Dilip Kumar. There never will be another Rajesh Khanna, Marlon Brando,
Wow.
or Uttam Kumar, Raj Kumar. And, like today's stars are, you can say that some of them are better actors and all those things, but stars, and I think that's a very important aspect of the culture of consuming films, locked in that space, you and the star and the theater, and that somehow has gone forever. Maybe
Great.
that's what I would like.
I really appreciate great perspective. As Ritesh rightly says, the stars have shrunk, the screen has shrunk, the timeline of films have got shorter. Indeed, that has created an ambience or a possibility of reflecting small cultural norms in cinema for niche audiences, because the digital medium has democratized filmmaking, brought filmmaking to every village now, and also allows filmmaking at much lower cost. And the internet has allowed a greater platform to take the cinema to a larger mass. And there are different tools of making it popular. There are different ways of raising funds, and crowdsourcing is one big way today. And they're crowdsourcing. The traditional crowdsourced cinema, old time, is the cinema that was the cinema on the Anand, the milk movement. I just now don't get the name. I suppose Smita Patil and Piyush may say, huh?
Manthan.
Manthan, right, Manthan. It's Manthan. So that was a crowdsourced. Some 10 lakhs milk cultivators contributed some 10 or 15, 20 rupees each, something like that. That was big money that time. And that's how the money came up. So today the technology-driven crowdsourcing has come in. I know at least 3 cinema being produced now through crowdsourcing. So the point is, these times are very interesting times. So in the next round, now we will focus on contemporary cinema, pandemic and post-pandemic. We'll concentrate on that. Each one take 2 or 3 or 4 minutes max, 2 to 4 minutes, and focus on how these times, since the beginning of 2020, these times are influencing the culture of people and the cinema that is being produced. And this cinema is not the traditional 2.5 hours concept of cinema. It can be small films, short films. It can be featurette, bigger than short, shorter than feature. And it can be feature cinema as well. We begin with the first speaker once again, Dr. Gauri Chakraborty, Pandemic Contemporary Cinema, your study. Gauri Chakraborty.
Thank you so much, sir. I would like to take this question with an extension of what Piyush was saying. Piyush said culture is context. And I want to extrapolate that to saying that Piyush, culture is context, and context is also built up through collective memory. And the fact that, during the pandemic period, we see an upsurge of consumption on the OTT platform is something that we as individuals from the media and entertainment, from the filmmaking space, watch very carefully, because what it does is it ruptures the concept of collective memory. Just like Piyush mentioning about Dilip Kumar, never ever will with generation the millennials and generation Z will we see that statement kitne aadmi the something like that, because what's also happening is that consumption is now pocketed in different baskets, and therefore within the same, and who is the upholder of cultures when we say cinema is a reflection of the socio-political, cultural and economic space of that time, of economic or these elements of the contemporary times. The unit then becomes not just the individual but also the family. And what's happened is that over time, the whole concept of cinema, receiving the consumption of cinema has now moved to a very individualistic experience. So number one, sir, I think collective memories are going to be one part that are going to change in terms of the pandemic and post-pandemic. But there's a caveat to what I'm saying. And the caveat is that there is one memory that all of us will take through, and which is that of the pandemic itself. So what's going to happen is that post the pandemic, you will see a lot of narratives, a lot of storytelling, which kind of feed or are inspired by, the pain and the pathos that the entire world has gone through during these years. This is my perception of.
Right.
So there's one more thing, which is that, when we talk of cinema, we talk of space, time, reality, and illusion. We say that these are the 4 pillars on which cinema is built on. And what's also happening is that our interpretation of space and time, of storytelling, which is, interrelated. Today, we have the long format, the episodic storytelling, and the short format. And I have personally called it the dyad, because I think it's a very enigmatic 180-degree line, in which on one side, people are willing to consume hours and hours of storytelling, just like our epics, the Mahabharata or the Ramayana in adhyayas and khands and chapters. And I'm referring to Indian cinema because Vikrant had a point. We'll have to close down on what we are discussing. And on the other side, there is the short format. Which is like a visual and a story, a 30-seconder, a 50-seconder, although we can't call that cinema, but there is also the shorter film, the 20-minute. And so what's also happening in with this consumption of the OTT is that people are enjoying both the formats, they're consuming both the formats, thus giving a signal to those who are making films, like Piyush was saying, that, different formats could work at the moment. And I think that is what is also part of the new way of thinking in our contemporary times. I hope I'm in and around of what you had
Right.
asked.
Fine. Culture is based on context, context based on collective memory getting expressed digitally in constrained times of pandemic, and pandemic as a major collective memory reference point. Good things brought forth by Dr. Gauri. We will move to the next speaker, but before that, let me read out some of the questions that the audience has asked from the audience. Some of the questions, and let this anyone can take up any of these questions when they are speaking. Shubhashmita has asked, how does cinema influence culture in today's time? Akshat Chopra, question for the panel. How do you think the pandemic is impacting storytelling? We have started the discussion on this. As a number of films are being created with low budgets within editing rooms. That's another question. Question for Dr. Ambrish Saxena from Neeraj Nanda South. Okay, South Times, Melbourne. The question has not been given. Okay. Upendra from Vilokana is asking, many elements contribute to culture. It is a collective consciousness of people and everyone directly contribute to it. So how does it contribute, impact cinema? That is the thing. Okay, Neeraj Nanda has asked, this is for, I believe, Dr. Saxena. How much does a mix of nationalism and films today actually help the ruling party? So BJP, nationalism and cinema, this relationship on that. Upendra from Vilokana has asked another question. Movie is done by an individual. How shall a product endorse to something called culture? Cinema is reflection of some thoughts. Many elements contribute to culture. It's a collective consciousness. I think this is more a comment. Yes. So these are some of the questions that have been brought forth. I move to the next panelist, Professor Padma Ramesh from Annapurna School. Over to you for pandemic and cinema, and also taking these questions that have been asked.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor. So I would like to answer, about pandemic and cinema. There are two strands in my answer here. One of the things which has been noticed, how has cinema changed? Has the content changed? Has the way the storytelling has been changed? And whether technically, how are people making films? So one of the things, and like a lot of speakers have mentioned here, that the way consumers or the way the audience has started taking films or watching films or consuming films has changed. Can you imagine from going to a big 70 theater to watching a film on your Google phone or Google Watch actually? So that's how the experience has changed. And one of the biggest, I would like to call it a disadvantage, because I do think cinema brings the whole aspect of cinema is magic, is illusion, which is being lost. The magic of films is lost when you watch it on your watch or on your telephone. And here I would just like to digress a bit and say, when our initial, film, initially like 50s, 60s, when films were made, and how the whole concept of popular cinema also came about was people went to have a darshan of film stars. The concept of darshan was very, very important in Indian films. It's not about a North Indian film or a South Indian film, but specifically so in South India. If people have seen the South Indian films, you know how the politics of of AP, Telangana and Tamil Nadu has been shaped by films, and in that context, popular films, So that concept of darshan, where you're going to sit in a theater, in darkness, looking up on the screen at this, demigods, which people thought were really gods in real life too. I can give you examples of Dr. NTR and Dr. ANR, and people really thought they were Krishna and Rama. And I remember my grandmother telling me that even the real Krishna would not have been as good looking as NTR in the films. But that's just to make a point that this is how the whole concept of this was the impact of cinema. This was the magic of cinema. This was the illusion and the grandeur of cinema, the darshan, where people went to have a darshan of the stars, of the gods, as it were. Today, we look at them on our phones. The magic has been lost. This is also one of the effects of the pandemic. Now we are telling stories which are urgent. Now we are telling stories which talk of emotions and instant gratification. There is nothing like building up. There's nothing like this whole experience of watching a film. Pandemic has had two impacts because we feel life is so, shanbhangur, jo Hindi mein kehte hain shanbhangur. You don't know whether you're going to be alive tomorrow or not. I might as well enjoy everything, whether it's food, whether it is drink, whether it's relationships, whether it's films. I want to enjoy it now. I need instant gratification. That is what cinema has become now. Especially so during pandemic times, because the pandemic has had, and like everybody knows, like it has had an impact not just on the physical but mental state of people, and this is being reflected in the kind of films which are being made. Another point which I want to talk about is now is the time of remote filmmaking. We don't need huge crews to make a film. We don't need people to come in, exchange ideas, brainstorm and write a story. No, I see films which are being made in my studio. I see students who do practicals in my college, and I see that there's only a director and the essential crew members who are on the set. Your sound designer is sitting somewhere else, your editor is sitting somewhere else, your producer is sitting somewhere else. So as the very well-known editor Shamil Karmakar was saying, that last few years he has not even stepped into a studio. He says, I've just sat at home, the films have come to me, digital medium has made it possible, and I edit the film, and then you immediately get in touch with them saying, okay, is this cut okay, is this shot okay, do you have other footage? But that's what pandemic has done to you. I do feel that pandemic has taken away the magic and illusion of films, but that's not to take away from from what the films are trying to say. I just want to say that the way films are made has changed. The way people look at films now has changed, because I think in the lack of watching films on the big screen, the only magic we can find is on the OTT platform, which unfortunately is limited, which unfortunately is repetitive, which unfortunately does not give you the same experience which films give. That's my 2 minutes. Thank you.
Great. Good points. The urgency of cinema or urgency of communication in pandemic times, instant gratification, life being on the brink, sort of chanabhangur attitude reflected through creativity as well. Utilitarian approach, short films, large, on the run, remote filmmaking, the magic and illusion of cinema getting lost, and OTT stealing that magic to an extent. Some of the key points that Professor Padma Ramesh had put forth, very rightly so. I believe I'm usually a writer on media issues. I believe this ongoing discussion is going to help me to write on how traditional cinema has changed during the pandemic times. A lot of food for thought here. Thank you. But I'd like to also mention here that cinema or any creative expression is a product of times as well. So these are the times which live on the brink, life on the edge. These are the times which are digitally governed and consumed digitally also, content. These are the times which look for immediate gratification in an unsure lifestyle. So there will be reflection of similar things on cinema, for sure. Over to you, Dr. Vikrant Kishore, to give your perspective on pandemic, cinema, culture, and the future. Dr. Vikrant.
Thanks, Dr. Ujjwal. Yeah, it's again another huge area to talk about. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. Online media landscape has been changing things. Pandemic only made it easy for it to be recognized sooner than ever. So short films, and then in fact, I get lots of short films made by my students. And when the pandemic came, suddenly it was like, what do we do when students don't have access to cameras, like the professional cameras which they had to do? So we ended up doing lots of films on mobile phones. And that was one of the biggest change, getting students do mobile phones. But another thing, when you look at the online media landscape, now there are hundreds of mobile phone film festivals. So what becomes essential and important today, it's about storytelling. So storytelling from maybe 10 seconds to maybe thousands of minutes. Okay, so there is a filmmaker called Filipino filmmaker, very well respected, Lav Diaz. I don't know if Google him, Lav Diaz. His shortest films are like 500 minutes films. Okay, so he is a kind of a a kind of a person who has given a term called slow cinema. So his all films are like it goes. He's won all the best top film festival awards, and his films are like you have to go for 9 hours to sit in theater to watch his films. And online media also gives you that. Today, I don't have to think when I'm making a film or I'm doing a kind of a short film. I don't have to think about timing. That oh, it needs to go at 27 minutes because I need 3 minutes ad time because it goes going on television. No, I'm not bothered about that, and I'm not even bothered about what time it is going. It can just be there all at once, and people can just binge watch things like that. So it has become very interesting. And yeah, but Padma also throws some interesting discussion around darshan, and that's another thing which I researched quite a lot on the culture of darshan in Indian cinema, and how Amitabh Bachchan, or especially in the southern states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and especially in Andhra Pradesh, how big the darshan element of star being big, but the star system is now being replaced by celebrity culture. And these new celebrities are being thrown up in these small, your mobile phones, from Instagram to YouTube to anything. So now if you see, and the latest, I was just going through, who are influencing the changing pattern of purchase in India on Statista. And it gave me a very interesting thing that earlier, it was the stars who would dominate the advertising field. Today, there is a big shift, especially between 16 to 24 and 25 to 35-year group, where, the YouTubers, the Instagrammers are impacting them more. Their impact was 61%. Then the film stars at 34%. But then again, this whole thing of big cinema or big theater versus small, screens. In 2020 and 21, in Australia, all the electronic shops, put in a huge bumper profit. Why? And one of the biggest thing was that everybody invested in buying a 65-inch, 75-inch, or a 80-inch television, because knowing that they won't get access to theater, and because these TV sets became so cheap, like we were getting, a 65-inch TV was for like 30,000 rupees, or a 75 one was for 60,000. So it was very cheap for a year, like spending under $1,000 for a TV set, getting a kind of a big screen experience, or even lots of those projectors, home projectors. So those also replaced. So virtually most of the homes and most of the middle class and upward homes here in Australia, you will see that they have their own theater space. So replicating that kind of experience of wanting to watch. And that's why one of the best sellers or cinematic experience that everybody wants to watch a superhero film, because those are the big ticket ones. And then now you get those premier access through Disney Plus, and you want to have it in your screen. So there's lots of things, but the best thing is that while we talk about, okay, there is a new culture of everything, it's, those kind of cinema is coming, I'm not liking it. But the thing is, think about 30 years back when there would be only 200 films in a year. Today, if you start counting the OTT platforms and all, there are more than 10,000 films, and choices are unlimited. And only I'm talking about India. So of course, look as to what is good, what is bad, but you will find lots of exciting products and projects out there. And I think it's the best time for any filmmaker to put their perspective, put their own take on culture or things like that. And I'm getting and someone questioned about how web series are changing or challenging. Why shouldn't they be challenging? Why should they be a hegemony of any specific cultural thing? And there are technology. Let them compete. Whoever wins will be the winner at the end of the day. Because ultimately people have a choice as to what they want to watch, and what kind of stories they want to watch. And there have been, of course, the government wants to censor lots of things which they don't like, which also talks about the culture of representation. Indian culture of representation has been very upper class kind of position. The moment you start talking about representation of the Dalits, you talk about the representation of women, strong women. Till date, Bollywood has really failed, or most of the regional cinemas have failed women representation. But you look at how the web series and others which have come up giving those kind of space to these kind of narratives, I think it is really good. And during the pandemic also, those kind of stories have come in, and of course, lots of times the government start feeling terrified with those kind of new stories which is not palatable to them, and Ambrish ji will later talk about all those kind of aspect. And also another thing, people, there was another question about the impact of Western culture and the things. Again, this is a very stereotypical thing of how Bollywood stereotypes Western culture. Western culture doesn't mean a skimpily clothed woman, who's sleeping with everyone. That's another kind of stereotypical thing. Most of the students who come to Australia, they think what they saw in films like Crook or Salam Namaste, Australia represents that is what they are coming. They are going to go to the bar, they are going to dance with 10 women out there, and they'll be living somewhere in Great Ocean Road. That's a kind of misrepresentation. That is the kind of a dream that cinema creates just to sell itself. But then the reality is far from that. And that's the kind of typical misrepresentation of West as well. And through NRI also, the so-called achiever NRI, the Rahul, Shah Rukh Khan, lots of misrepresentation in those kind of NRI films also. So there are so many things to talk about, exciting as well. But nationalism is something which I would throw on to Ambrish ji to take on later.
Yeah, good. Good. You have actually brought in a lot of aspects, Storytelling is the most crucial aspect of cinema. 10 seconds or 9 hours, doesn't matter. It's the story that sells. A great message from you, Vikrant. Stars to celebrity. The movement, the cultural movement of cinema impact has moved from star culture to celebrity culture, where the celebrities are influencers. You have quoted Statista, I'm quoting EP Media, which says 72% of the pandemic period marketing has been influencer-driven marketing, and Instagram has been the #1 social media, followed by Facebook. This is something that you have also brought forth in a big way. Then OTT, digital cinema, is becoming also, there are challenges of stories there, but it's also more representative, much more varied in content. And the way you busted the myth of so-called myth of Western culture, so-called Western culture, was also very powerful. Over to you, Dr. Ambrish Saxena, to speak on the question that Neeraj Nanda asked earlier: nationalism, ruling party, and cinema. That's one. And second, do you subscribe to the idea that OTTs need to be constrained, restrained, any form? Do you subscribe to the idea how digital filmmaking might be restrained by the government rules in times to come? Over to you, Dr. Saxena.
Ujjwal ji, can I just add one thing? Neeraj Nanda ji is a very well-respected and one of the first Australian Indian journalists here in Melbourne. And he has been doing some landmark work, and it's really good to see him coming and attending this panel.
Great. Thank you, Neeraj ji, for joining us and participating actively in this program. So over to Dr. Saxena to speak for the next 3 minutes.
Yeah, so thank you, Professor Chowdhury. Firstly, responding to the question of Neeraj Nanda. The question is, too political in nature. I was talking about the films, what impact these films will be making on society, or how these films will be benefiting the government. I am not very sure of that, but looking primarily at the question, what I can instantly respond to, that I don't feel that such kind of films are going to benefit the government in any way. Obviously, there is a fervor, there is an emotion which works for some time, but it's a temporary phase. And whenever any filmmaker decide to make a film on a certain theme or certain content, it is all based on this, that what kind of socio-economic political scenario is there, and how what is going to sell in the market. So these are the films which are selling in the market, and for quite some time such films are being made, and that is how in 2021, as I referred already, we will be watching these kind of films like Shesha or Bhuj or Suryavanshi or this State of the Siege. But the long-term impact will be what I cannot say it for very sure. Now, responding to OTT, what OTT has done, OTT has done so many things, but what I can see, what OTT has done, according to me, OTT has opened the worldview. It's not that earlier our worldview was not open. Earlier also we were watching films of different countries. Earlier also we were watching film of Hollywood. But then the entire cinema is available now. All kind of contents are available now. The Spanish cinema, and then the dubbed cinema. Now there are a lot of people who either do not know that language, or they, even if they know the language, they cannot enjoy the film in any other language except their own language. Now the dubbed films or dubbed web series is a great thing which OTT has brought, and which is something great which has happened in a big way during the last 1 year. Even the Tamil films, we all watch Tamil films in North India, which are all dubbed films, but the quality of dubbing is
প্যান্ডেমিকটা কি ধরনের আর কি এফেক্ট করেছে
but the quality of dubbing has constantly increased. I myself have been watching many such films during the last 1 week. I have watched, yesterday only I watched one film which was a Tamil film dubbed in Hindi, 24 ghante in Chennai. And then I watched a web series during the past 1 week. This is November Story. This is a Tamil language crime thriller which has been dubbed. There were 7 episodes, and I watched those 7 episodes in 3 days. Now, this is something which is new to us. I mean, the foreign cinema and the cinema within the country, which earlier we were terming as regional cinema, now all that cinema has become the mainstream cinema. Now, another important thing which I would like to say, earlier also I was thinking about that, which many panelists have raised this point, that the star culture has vanished, and Vikrant took another point, that it has been changed from star to celebrity. But I want to draw another aspect of this whole story. This is that the culture of hate has started, and this culture of hate is impacting cinema. And if so many examples can be given, but I will give you one example of Sadak 2. Sadak 2, since it was made by Mahesh Bhatt, and that certain section was not liking him and was opposing his film, this is happening in a big way. If you don't like somebody, and this is because of this whole right sentiment which is on the rise, that if you don't like some filmmaker, then you will do all possible things to suppress that filmmaker, or to see to this that his films flop. Sadak 2 is one such example, wherein this became the world's most disliked YouTube video, the trailer. So this shows the spread of the hate culture. Now, as far as the smaller film is concerned, which many people talked about, even Dr. Gauri was talking about this, I would also like to reinforce this concept of the short films. Many names are given to this. These are the smaller films, or these can also be terms as anthologies. Many such anthologies have come, wherein few short stories are clubbed together to create one film. Here I can give you some examples, like that feels like Ishq. This is a combination of 6 short stories which are being presented as one film. The content which are there on the OTT, those examples can also be given here, like Ajib Dastan, the ghost story, lust story. So this is completely something new which OTT has brought to us. And obviously, since the time this pandemic has struck, this pace of such kind of content has increased tremendously on OTT. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. You brought new angles, dubbed the cinema and the varied culture reflection during these restricted times. The culture of hate, very well said, very important. And surely plastic or aggressive nationalism to have political benefits, as has been seen by some of the films in times today. Great points, and the variety through OTT as well. So we move to the last speaker for the second round comment. We have only 2-3 minutes remaining, but still very important to have the last speaker's perspective on this. And before I do that, let me read a comment from the chat box by a colleague of mine, Shomendra Bhattacharya. He says, visual storytelling is the most important aspect, as has been explained. Whatever the duration is, either a TVC, a commercial, or a feature film. The storytelling, visual storytelling is the critical part. He's also asking a technical question. Don't you think not changing a lens is a fear factor during pandemic cinema or pandemic films while making through mobile, as depth of field and specialized light design are often missed out in this assembled filmmaking that we have during the pandemic times, particularly mobile-based and digital cinema making? There's a technical question also. So over to Piyush Rai for your last comments, answering this question and also your comments on pandemic and cinema. Dr. Piyush Rai, Dean, RV University.
Thank you, sir. I'll take the question actually, and I think it's a very valid question. Technology has become far more accessible, and the way of shooting a film has changed, which means, and I am very positive about the changes that the pandemic has brought in. And so one would be that now we're going to see a lot of cinema with ideas. And like just as couple of years ago, documentary could never be thought as a happening genre. Today, documentary is a very valuable genre, and and also the other thing. The other thing would be that experimental cinema is going to come in a big way. So this is directly taking to the question of the lenses, how we shoot, what camera we use, the certain idea that a cinema has to look in a certain way. It has to be like, if you don't have a 4K camera, Netflix will not take your film. Fair enough. There are 10 other OTT platforms ready to take your film. And as even Praveen ji can endorse that, so many different kind of films come, and film festivals are such a big platform. So today I can make a film and I can get a buyer from Egypt, from Norway, from Latin America. And this is something like content-driven films are coming up. So there is going to be a time of cinema of ideas. Technology, yes, if you are a big studio, you have that, you make those movies. If you don't have that, there is an audience for every kind of film today. So that will be and a genre that I feel, as more and more the crew size shrinks and fewer people, it actually cinema becomes like the camera becomes what the pen was to an author. An entire film, like what Dadasaheb Phalke writes in his interview to the cinematograph committee in the 1920s, 10 years after the establishment of the film industry with Raja Harishchandra. And he said, in my first film, I was the cameraman, I was the director, I was the writer, I was the dressman. I used to even train my actors. He was a one-man show because nobody knew before him what all these things were, what all these machines were, how did you operate them. And that's something we are coming back exactly 110 years from now, and what it brings is a lot more empowerment. We will see far more filmmakers, far many ideas, and academics are going to pick up a camera and do a film. Like our curriculum is changing. When we are designing now curriculum, about 20 to 30% we are keeping documentaries and films as references because we are increasingly catering to a very visual generation. So, and as they say, like, this will be my last thought. There is this dialogue in the film Namesake where they say in older times, if you couldn't go to a place but wanted to know about it, the best thing was to pick up a popular novel or acclaimed novel from that space, and you got to know about the people and everything. And still, novel could be depending on anything from, say, 200 to 500 pages if you're reading a War and Peace to understand Russia. Today, what you can do is you pick a film, a good film, and you get that window. And that's something digitization has made possible. Even what did they say? Torrent has made possible. We all download. And students do that, researchers do that. Otherwise, where would you access? So yeah, that would be my thought. Great times are going to come.
Thank you. You had very unique perspectives and has been noted by some of the members of the audience as well in the chat box. Very rightly said, there is something very popular sentence that the more the world changes, the more it is the same. History repeats itself. And we started cinema in the world more than a century ago with one-man army, oftentimes someone who is multi-skilled, and we are coming back to one-man army sort of scenario again, a multi-skilled professional again. 1, 2, ideated varied cinema is possible today with digital coming in, expenses going down. Experimental and documentary cinema possible, which in a much bigger manner than earlier before. While we say this, we'll also miss, perhaps, we don't know, Sangam Madras Kuriyar inspired Tamil cinema, inspired Hindi cinema's music and dance might be missed out to an extent. The magic and illusion of cinema, the make-believe world of cinema, to an extent will be compromised. The lesser the big screen, the silver screen is seen, the lesser the theatrical release of cinema is seen, the more will be such things missed out. Yes. Ramesh Tekwaniji rightly talks about Filmic Pro as a software. Just you can see the chat box. So we shall be missing some of the aspects that Bollywood has been identified with. Larger than life belief systems, larger than life images. But on the other hand, cinema, which is the most creative expression of human creativity, goes closer to human life, to niche audiences, to small groups of people, with more democratic expressions, varied expressions, not just overarching cultural expressions, but niche, small groups, pathos or issues reflected through digital cinema, through the alternate cinema that is coming up. We would not be astonished when there are small films, short films also getting equal importance as feature films in the international film festivals. We would not be astonished when ad films are also a part of regular feature film festivals. We shall not be astonished when societal or developmental organization films vie with commercial studio films as well. This is where we are going. This is perhaps what Piyush might be thinking as the new golden age of cinema. So welcome to the new age of cinema. Let's retain some of the beauty of the past, but let's create something completely new. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention, for your focus, sharing of your ideas, and those who also participated in the interaction through the chat box. And a big salute and hello to Praveen Nagda, Elena, and the team which organized this film festival on culture and cinema. With that, we bring this session to an end. Thank you very much. Regards from me, from my end.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ujjwal sir, and all the eminent people present over here. Very happy to see Neeraj ji from Australia joining us. Some of our jury members also are a part of audience. It was a great conversation, lot of learning, very interesting points made. Short films, yes, there is a short film time has come and it will continue to be there for a while. Storytelling, yes, it's all about storytelling. How beautiful you can tell a story in 1 minute 29 seconds. In fact, one of our films in a festival which takes through the journey of portrayal of women by the society, by the world cultures over centuries. They put up in short 1 minute 29 seconds. It's a movie called Feminum. If you get time, please watch in the festival. Of course, there are many good movies. So I think I want to express my gratitude to everybody. Thank you so much for taking your busy time from your family time on a Sunday weekend and being here with all of us to share the knowledge that you have gained, give your perspectives, and enable our learning. As I believe that life is all about learning. You keep on learning. I'm even now I'm learning a lot of new things in life, and so this will continue. Once again, thank you so much, and hope we'll meet again soon. There are a few more panel discussions in the next 2-3 days. If you get time, I would like you to be a part of it. We watch them. There are a lot of things which people from across the world will talk to us, and hope to see you there. Thank you so much.